Oh.
Yeah, I messaged you
You got
before I
it.
was about to.
Yeah.
I was like, I hadn't asked Jerry. I asked Jennifer
Maybe. Just tell me we got
yes.
enough.
Because I was doing it really quick. Like I was like, oh, I gotta do it. I was doing it for everybody.
All right. Good morning. Glad to have each and every one of you here this morning. Whether you're here in person or on live stream at home, we are glad you're here. We're going to be continuing our lesson this morning on kind of continual. Last week, Liz talked about, Rebecca and Isaac. This week, we're going to talk about the debacle of Jacob and Esau. But before we begin that, I'm going to ask that Andrew read the Bible Meets Live.
Lisa and Susan saw each other for the first time in 3 years at their father's funeral. Growing up, they were close sisters who shared cars, sorrows, joys, and even a dorm room. The rift began when Susan came to visit Lisa, who began to suspect Susan was being less than honest about an important relationship. That suspicion caused a breach that was never resolved. Would they escalate the feud, or would grief bring them to reconcile? This encounter mirrors two brothers, Jacob and Esau, whose impending reunion loomed closer after years as rivals.
So, studying a lot of this situation here between Jacob and Jacob's life, and going back to what Liz talked about last week, and we'll go through that short synopsis because this lesson really is very, very minute in trying to go back and understand what is truly going on here. Because if you've been coming to Sunday night services, you're hearing about not Esau, but Joseph. And the Bible study is about him. Well, we all know Joseph is not necessarily his next to last son of Jacob, which being Benjamin was the last and Joseph was next to last. But we all know, as the Bible study talks about on Sunday nights, that Joseph was the favorite. He was treated favorably, and we're going to talk about that lesson in the next coming Sundays. But today we're talking about Jacob and Esau, and I think you really need to understand, as Leah's talked about last week, why all this matters and why. Because this lesson talks about the obvious. The obvious is that Esau was humble. He came back to his brother and didn't kill him anyway. But we need to understand where all this comes from. And as I've been researching, as EC's been studying on Sunday nights, I think it leads back to, like he says, in Genesis 25, verse 23. And it ain't even in the lesson this morning, but I've got to give you a lead up to it, because if you read our lesson, you're going to be completely lost from where it starts at. So the Lord told Isaac in verse 23 of 25, he says, 2 nations are in your womb. And he's talking to Rebekah here. And 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. That was told to Isaac before they ever even had Esau and Jacob. Well, what happened last week that we talked about, what happened? he's already been told that Jacob is going to rule over Esau. So what is the big issue here? Why is there such rivalry? And as EC talks on Sunday night, this family is complete chaos. If you want to run into a family, and we all know families, and if you all want to run into a family this day and time, or think about what you see on TV, if you want to think about drama, deception, idiocy, stupidity, anything you want to think of, think about Jacob and what he's done. As EC likes to call him, Jacob is a flim-flam man. He's been that way his whole life. He was even groomed to be that way, as Liz talked about last week. What did Rebecca scheme to do? And this is where we're going to start our lesson today. What happened? Rebecca liked Jacob more than she liked Esau. Well, we just read in verse 23 of 25 that the Lord had already said that the oldest was going to rule the youngest. So why did Rebecca last week have to get involved to connive her own plan to make Jacob the ruler over Esau? Because she didn't trust in God and what God's plan was. So you're going to see here, what did I write down? 2 wives, 2 concubines. He's going to end up with young'uns by multiple women, and he's already been told he's going to be the leader, but at the end of the day, he doesn't trust what the Lord has to say. So you just see this humongous amounts of deception. So as we left off last week, as Liz was talking, and I'll read the verse last week, Jacob answered Rebekah, his mother, "Look, my brother Esau is a hairy man, but I am a man with smooth skin." So this is where they come in and they're conniving the plan, because Isaac's old, he can't see, he can't hear. So the thing going on here is he's going to give Esau his blessing, and so he's gone out to go hunting to bring back something to sacrifice and have the favorite meal for his father. Well, we all know what went on. Rebekah, at the end of the day, got Jacob to go get 2 of the fatted goats. He brings it back. They slaughter it. She cooks those fatted goats and tells him to go serve it to Isaac. He can't see, he can't hear, so he fakes his father out, making him think he is Esau, but he's actually Jacob. So Jacob has been given the blessing from Isaac, his father. So we're in this situation, and now Esau's come back. Jacob's got the blessing. Esau comes back, and now he sees that he's been deceived. Isaac sees he's been deceived, and so he's approached his father. And this is Isaac talking back to Esau after Esau finds out what has happened. And I will let Laura begin with verse 35 through 37, and then it jumps to one last verse of 41.
But he replied, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." So he said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me twice now. He took my birthright, and look, now he has taken my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you saved a blessing for me?" But Isaac answered Esau, "Look, I have made him a master over you, have given him all of his relatives as his servants, and have sustained him with grain and new wine. What then can I do for you, my son?" Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. And Esau determined in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob."
So we see what's going on now. The deceitful brother Jacob has fooled his father again and took his blessing, which we all know he talks about here is Esau saying, he says, he's cheated me twice. But if we go back, and this is why I talk about such deceitfulness and such unfaithful believers in this family. If you remember, Jacob didn't steal the birthright from Esau. What happened? He didn't really fool him. He was hungry, and he sold his birthright over what? Some soup. So you begin to think, well, how much faith did Esau have anyway? He gave away his birthright for something to eat. So you can see, you can look both ways on that. But anyway, he's talking about his birthright and he's talking about the blessing this time. Well, this birthright and these blessings mean that he's going to get double inheritance. That's why it was such a, it's in the chair out there. But you see the whole situation here is Esau thinks he's been cheated twice. He's technically been cheated once. I don't call it being cheated twice because the first time he basically gave that away. So, in his unfaithful belief of what God had in store for him, he gave it away. But the message part of this here, and it talks about the humbleness that Esau is going to have in the last two parts that we talk about. But this part of the lesson here, as I've researched and listened and how I could kind of describe it, is this family is, like I said earlier, so messed up, so unfaithful, so unbelieving that all this stuff is going on. And what did I read in verse 25? I mean, chapter 25, verse 23. God had already promised them what was going to happen. So why in the world would Rebekah and Isaac get in the way? Why would they want to create something? Because they had so much unbelief. And I was listening to a pastor talk about this morning, and he said, you know, we should all have a ton of faith, because as we find out, going along with Jacob and his family from Abraham, that God is blessing them the whole way through. God's blessing Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, all the way through as he promised, even though they didn't have any faith, and even though they tried every way they could to screw it up. And sometimes I look at that about our own life, is what we're reading here. None of this would have happened. Think about what Rebekah did. Rebekah made her favorite son the one that was going to get everything, but what ended up happening? And we're going to skip to verse 33 in a minute, but what ended up happening? Rebekah never seen Jacob again. Because as we read there, Esau determined in his heart, the days of mourning of my father are approaching. So they knew Isaac was about to die. He says, I'm going to let my father die, and then I'm going to kill Jacob. So what did Rebekah have to do? Send Jacob off to where she never seen him again. So how good was that? How good did that work out? Being deceptive have led not only, Jacob might have got a double inheritance and might have got the blessings from Esau, but what ended up happening on the back end? She never seen him again in her whole life, her favorite son. So the thing I gathered from this morning was, thank God that God still gives blessings to people who screw things up, because I know I screw things up. We all try to do things on our own path and our own ways because we think we can do it better, or we think it ain't on God's time. And that's essentially what their problem was. We all know that Isaac and Rebekah were very, very old, and they had been promised children and children. We all see these things that would have tested faith, but none of them had enough faith to hold on to listen to what God had already promised. So what happens? They all time to take it into their own hands, and they're going to do it their own way. And what is created? Complete chaos. Complete and utter chaos. And as I said earlier, Jacob, as EC likes to say, is a flim-flam man. Where did he get it from? His mama. She taught him to be deceptive. She taught him to do the things he done, and he just lived the life that he always lived. Now, we read these lessons because it's going to transition over to chapter 33, where we see the humility that we can understand and begin to love and try to represent our own selves and our own lives. But before we get there, the story goes, and there's a lot of moving parts. But as Jacob leaves, as his mama says, because she's afraid Esau's going to kill her, I have to make sure I don't skip anything. We all know that he goes to, and this is weird to me, but I'd have to ask EC about this. He goes to stay with his uncle, Rachel's or Rebecca's brother. His name is, I think it starts with a L, maybe it's Layden. But he has 2 daughters, one named Leah and one named Rachel. Well, this is where the deceit comes in at. He really, really loves Rachel, and Rachel really loves him. Well, we all know, as EC likes to say back then, they still do today, they wear a lot of facial cover. You can't see their face. So you have to work back then to marry the daughter. So he works for 7 years, thinks he's marrying Rachel. At the end of the day, he takes the veil off on the day of marriage. Guess what? He was deceived. He's married Leah. EC likes to joke and say he got married. He actually got married to the cross-eyed one. That's why he didn't want to marry Leah to start off with. But anyway, so he loves Rachel enough that he says, I'm going to hang around 7 more years and work 7 more years. So then he marries Rachel. Well, by that time, he's already had kids with Leah. So he has, I think I remember, 7 kids with Leah. Still hasn't had a kid with Rachel. So Rachel's barren. So then he gets the housewife, I guess you could call it, has 2 kids with her, has another kid with another housewife, and finally Rachel bears 2 children, the one being Joseph, which is the most famous one, and the last one being Benjamin. So can you imagine what his structure looked like? He's got 2 concubines, 2 wives, kids, multiple kids by each one of them, and this is where he's at. This is the whole story of what Jacob's got going on. And if he can help that family, I feel pretty good this morning, honestly, because I feel like he can help me and Amanda a lot, because we definitely ain't got all that going on. A bunch of cats and a dog, but nothing like that. So at the end of the day, we kind of see how this has progressed. It has progressed in a manner that, as EC likes to talk on Sunday night, it is just complete stupidity, ignorance, chaos, and Jacob is involved in every single bit of it. So as we've got this going on, Jacob has decided, I'm going back to the promised land, and this is 20 years later. It's been 20 years since he's seen his brother. Now remember, they're twins, so it's not like they're not going to be able to notice each other. And so we skipped ahead 20 years. He's coming back to the promised land, and I'll ask Stephen if he would read verses 1 through 4 and 33.
Now Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming toward him with 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 slave women. He put the slaves and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went ahead and bowed to the ground 7 times until he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet him, hugged him, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Then they wept.
So this is the main part about the lesson this morning, the humility that Esau has. Esau's still bigger. He's still stronger. If you remember what Liz talked about last week, they said he came out hairy, but they're trying to describe that he came out a masculine man. He hunts, he fishes, he's bigger, he's stronger. He's that guy. The other Jacob, not so. As some people that I've read about and researched, he's a mama's boy. He ain't gonna get out and get dirty. He ain't into that. He's gonna play with his little play game stations all day long, and he's gonna be with mamas wherever he goes. Well, Esau's the guy that's gonna go out hunting with daddy. He's gonna be on the tractor farming, whatever it is. He's the guy. He's the outdoorsman. Well, so there ain't no way Jacob's going to win that fight. And as you see here, he comes toward him with 400 men. Well, look what poor Jacob's got. He's got Leah, Rachel, and the 2 slave women and the children, which is, you still see how deceptive and how ignorant Jacob is, and how I can't even explain it. So what does he do? He sees them coming, so he puts his least favorite people in front. He goes out ahead, but he says, what does he say? He's going to put the slaves and their children first, so they would get killed first. Leah and her children next, so they get killed next, and then he puts Rachel and Joseph last because he figures that maybe they would be saved since they were at the back of the line. So you see how Jacob thinks. He's a messed up individual all the way around. He sees things in a different light, and he still doesn't understand. But the one time that he has changed he's humbled himself is one. Anybody can be humble when they know they're fixing to get their butt kicked. And that's what he's scared of, because as it doesn't explain, it says, now Jacob looked up and Esau come toward him. And as Esau ran, meeting him, so what do you think Jacob thought? Oh, God. He sees him coming over the hill and he's running, and this big dude's coming toward him. It's his brother. He thinks this ain't going to go well, and he's got a sword on his side. He thinks, I'm fixing to die. Well, we all see he doesn't do that. Esau has not seen his brother for 20 years, and the way he looks at it, bygones is bygones. He's just glad to see his brother. And he says, you see what he did? He hugged him, he threw his arms around him, and he kissed him, and then they wept. It's the first time that you'll see that Jacob actually kind of changed his mindset here. But the lesson that we need to learn is from Esau in this part of the lesson this morning. You think about what, and I can't even contrive as to what was going on back then, but my God, he lost his birthright. He lost the blessing, which would have been a double blessing of Isaac's inheritance, which Isaac was a very, very wealthy man. And Esau, at the end of the day, as we read in chapter 25, he was going to have to abide by what Jacob said, which, can you imagine what that felt like? And as we read back in 27, what did Esau say? The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Isaac's already dead. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. So as he comes running toward him, I'm sure Jacob says, this is it, I'm done. But he didn't. And we can learn a lot from Esau. And we see people in present day and time that maybe had been wronged or they've been deceived, as Esau was. And a lot of people can't get over it. They hold grudges. As we've talked before, we talked about 2 Sundays ago about land, and there's been families divided over land. But some of us in here may have been wronged by somebody, and we may be still holding a grudge about it. We may have been very, very done wrong. And the person that done you wrong maybe has never apologized, or they may have never done anything to make it right. But as we see here, Esau doesn't worry about the past. He was just glad to see his brother. Things had went well for him too, and he didn't hold that grudge anymore. It was something different. He was trying to handle it in the way a Christian and the way God wanted him to handle it. And he wanted to rebuild the relationship with Jacob that he had lost 20 years ago. And maybe even in Esau's mind, by making that statement that when my father dies, I'm going to kill my brother, maybe that haunted him for 20 years. From what I can understand, that probably did, because he didn't know where Jacob was at. So he left on a sour note and never seen his brother for 20 years. So we can all see how Esau's response towards his brother is the kind of response that we need to make. We need to throw our hand out first instead of waiting for the other person to, because if we wait for the other person, it may never happen. It may never happen. So our humbleness as Christians need to be played out as Esau done in this case. And as we move, as you can see, he's out, he's kissed him, they're sitting there weeping together, probably talking about times that's missed. I can imagine it talks about it over, but we're not going to go into that lesson today, but it talks about over. I'll let John read it first. That way we can talk about that. It's verse 8 through 11.
So Esau said, "What do you mean by this whole procession I met? To find favor with you, my lord," he answered. "I have enough, my brother," Esau replied. Keep what you have. But Jacob said, No, please, if I have found favor with you, take this gift from me, for indeed I have seen your face, and it is like seeing God's face, since you have accepted me. Please take my present that was brought to you, because God has been gracious to me, and I have everything I need. So Jacob urged him until he accepted.
So he's looking at this procession. He sent everything he had with him. Donkeys, goats, whatever it was, anything that he had, Jacob had. He was sending it out as a present. It's just trying to say maybe Esau, I mean, he's got 400 men. He feels like he's fixing to get crushed. And so Esau asked him, what about it? What is this procession that you sent? I mean, he sent it out it was immaculate amounts of gifts, because Jacob is a very wealthy man, so he had that at his disposal. So you can see Esau's a little confused there, but you can see why he sent it. Because at that time, I can promise you, Jacob, as I said earlier, he thinks he's done with. He thinks he's dead, because he just feels like, well, I better send everything I can to him to see if it'll give me favor. But at the same time, Esau's kind of confused, and I can only imagine what he's looking at. He sees that, and then he sees all these kids and all these people standing around with these concubines and two wives and everything. I imagine he's thinking, what kind of circus is this that's just showed up? But the thing we need to learn from Esau is he didn't want any favors. He didn't want anything like that. All he wanted was to be able to see his brother again. And he was happy, and he let the bygones be bygones. And you can see how scared, I say scared because I think that's the way I read it. If I had found favor with you, take this gift from me, for indeed I have seen your face, and it is like seeing God's face. So he kind of contributed, like, thank God, seeing a happy and a forgiving face on Esau was like seeing God before my own very eyes. That's what he compared Esau to when he showed up, because he thought he was going to see an angry face and a face that was going to cut his head off, but he didn't. He said, I think I've seen God's face today, because the way you have treated me, even though what I did to you has got to be part of God's plan, because no other way would it have happened this way. And as you can see, finally, he accepts all the gifts from Jacob. But I always like to read further. How does it end? How does it go? So we can find out a lot more and a lot better understanding from EC tonight. But you think, well, Jacob's learned his lesson. If you read on further in Genesis chapter 34 and 35, they all get together and they have a meal and they do these things and they get together. Well, Esau encourages Jacob to come with him, with his 400 men, and he will protect him. But Jacob, and this is why I was trying to see if Jacob actually learned his lesson, but he tells Esau, I'm going to head south and I'll be right behind you. I'll be right behind you on your heels, and you're going to go, I forgot what the city was, but so he took off and was waiting on Jacob. Well, guess what Jacob did as soon as he got out of sight? He took off north. And that's the kind, so the pastor I was listening to this morning, you begin to understand, even though Jacob he's been forgiven and he's lucky he's still alive, he still is the same deceptive, cheating, whatever you want to call it, person that he was, even though he's been given multiple chances. And that goes back to the very first part of the lesson, is God is still going to bless him. Even though how screwed up he's been and how screwed up he's doing things. And so it gives me promise this morning is no matter how much we screw up and no matter how much God has in our plan that we end up screwing up, he's still there. He still can bless you, because Jacob proved this case through and through, because he screwed up so many times, as we see through this whole lesson. And he will screw up again with Joseph, that we'll learn about in the next two lessons. But as we finish up this morning, it's got three things that it always talks about, and three things that we can do we can always encourage a family member. We can always be encouragers and not discouragers. And I have a feeling that and think that our world today has got more discouragers than we do encouragers, unfortunately. We can evaluate ourselves. Are you moving toward an emotionally healthy future? Is that what you're heading towards, or are you looking back in the past, worried about what went on then, or something with a family member or a friend? And finally, it's up to us as Christians, if there is something out there that is broken, a relationship or whatever, it may be tough, but it's for us to stick the first hand out for reconciliation. That's our deal. That's our promise that God gives us, and it's us to make the first action. And finally, it says when we reconcile, we don't just see the face of the one with whom we chose to reconcile. We get a glimpse to God's face too. When reconciliation happens, everybody wins. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you this morning for this lesson. While not the lesson sometimes is confusing, and while we don't understand how you continue to bless in the Bible the people that continue to make mistakes, we can also understand from our own lives, Lord, that we make mistakes and we mess things up, and you continue to stick with us and bless us no matter what. And we thank you for that, Lord. Lord, we pray this morning that you'll be with EC as they bring us our morning message. Be with the children as they sing. Lord, I just pray this week that you'll help us go out, guide us, direct us, and be better servants to you. I pray all these things in your name. Amen.